Today, as Marty mentioned in his opening comments, will be devoted to remembering the brothers and sisters who were part of this congregation in some way and have passed away in the last roughly 2 years, while all of us together have suffered through this COVID pandemic. And I want to mention, we do have the special bulletin, if you wish, that has the order of worship and the pictures and all that. And we want to thank Tina for doing that. She did all the research to find all these pictures and put everything together, as well as the slides that you'll be seeing later on. So the office was very busy this week making sure that was all done, so we appreciate her. Anyways, in many cases, we were not able to, during this COVID thing, we're not able to visit and comfort people in our families, loved ones, because of COVID restrictions. Imagine somebody gets sick and all of a sudden it grows worse, and then all of a sudden they have to go to the hospital, so they take them to the hospital, and then at the hospital they say, oh no, you can't come in. But I'm the wife, I'm the husband, I'm the son. It doesn't matter who you are, you're not getting in. Well, what am I going to do? Well, you just wait, we'll let you know, we'll call you at home, we'll give you reports, but no, you can't go in. And your loved one is going down, 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 and passes. And you've not been able to be there to comfort them, to hold their hand, to whisper, I love you. And then the funeral people said, well, no funeral, we can't, the law says we can't get together. They didn't happen in every single case, but I've known cases where people were not able to be with their loved one during those important moments, and then could not memorialize them at a funeral with the family and the friends. Had to settle for a quick prayer, a graveside. A life shouldn't pass that way, that quickly. It shouldn't happen, but it did, and it has. And in many instances, it continues to happen. And so this Sunday, therefore, is a time when we want to remember and pray for each person this congregation has lost, and in a very small way, honor their memory. And this we will do after our regular worship service is over, and as Marty said, he'll come back up here to lead us in those thoughts. My lesson, however, is not about those who have left us, but about those who remain, those who are left behind, those whose common companions are sorrow and hurt. The common experience is that when someone dies, it's like an earthquake. It's like a bomb blast. I use the analogy because, like these events, the death of someone close and important to us changes our lives instantly. And at first, there's a lot of action swirling around us, just like when a bomb goes off. Lots of action. You got to do, in normal times, funeral preparations and paperwork, and the phone calls start coming in, and the family comes over, and church visits, and food donations, and you got 52 casseroles in your freezer, and did I mention the constant phone calls? However, after the initial impact and rush of attention focused on the sad event, once that's over, after everybody goes home, after the world moves on to the next terrible event, all that is left is pain. And the only companion we have is hurt. Suffering quietly, silently, suffered daily. In the middle of the night, you wake up just for a moment thinking that things are normal, and then you realize that they're not. Or as you walk down the street doing your everyday things, you're reminded over and over of the hurt that you suffer. I use the death of a loved one as an example, but it's the same experience for every incident that causes hurt in our lives. For example, long after you announce that you have perhaps a terminal cancer, when everybody hears the news and responds with sympathy and cards and kind words, and then they have to go on because they're healthy. They got to go back to work, they got things to do, there's T-ball, the season that's starting. And then you have to deal with your fear and your hurt by yourself, because the world, is busy. Another example, long after people have stopped bringing meals because of your heart attack, for example, you have to live with the pain and the uncertainty and the loss caused by it. You're the one that cries for nothing. You used to never cry, and now you cry at the drop of a hat. And most of the times you do it by yourself. No matter how good their intentions, people's comfort and care never outlast the hurt caused by your own personal tragedy. Most of us have to learn to live and cope with our hurt by ourselves, because the train of sympathy stops at our house for only a little while before it just moves on. I learned this early in life when my own father died. I missed a few days of school because of the funeral, and when I came back, the teacher kindly asked me how I was feeling. There was this awkward moment when I walked into the class and that's the guy, his father died. Really? Oh my, and then dring, it was recess. And everything was back to normal, and my assignments, they had to be in 24 hours. A day later, it was business as usual, and I was expected to toe the line and, or not, get detention. And it was hard for me at 15 years old to understand, since nothing had changed inside of me in 24 hours. My dad was gone. I still hurt, but the world had already forgotten and moved on to something else. So whether it's a momentous thing like the death of a loved one, or a very personal thing like an ongoing illness, or the loss of mobility, everybody else is walking around up and down the stairs and this and that, but you have to walk slowly now. You need help sitting down and getting up. Or the loss of income. You used to spend, whatever it costs, and now all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you don't have that income anymore. Personal pain is personal, and it's ongoing. And whether people know about it or not, the hurt is the same. Suffering publicly or suffering privately is the same. One is no easier than the other. For this reason, we have a Lord who understands pain. Fortunately, we have a Lord who is always there to help us with our hurts. Jesus Christ is the Lord of the heavens, yes, and He's the Lord of the earth, yes. And thankfully, for those who suffer, He's also the Lord of hurting. And the Lord of those who hurt provides several important avenues of relief for those who believe and trust Him, and I would like to share a couple of these with you this morning in my lesson. First of all, the Lord of hurting provides the avenue of prayer. You know, what does God give me? How does God help me? Where is He when I need Him? Where is He and what is He doing? Well, He's giving you the avenue of prayer. People neglect prayer and they don't think much about prayer until they need to pray. Can you imagine, just for a moment, what life would be like if you couldn't pray? You couldn't. No God to appeal to, simply your fate to suffer. You make the best of it. God didn't care. No use praying because God is not interested in your welfare. Imagine if that was the truth. But God has revealed Himself and His will in the Bible, and throughout its pages we see example after example of men and women pouring out their hearts to God, who listens, God who cares, God who answers prayers. Abraham, who prayed for a son and received one when he was old in age. Samson, who prayed for one last chance to defeat his enemies and brought down the Philistine temple with his bare hands. And Hezekiah, who cried and wept and prayed to the Lord to save him from a terminal illness and was given 15 extra years of life. And the women who prayed for Dorcas to be released from death, and Peter raised her up by God's power because of their prayers. And the stories are multiplied by the dozens of men and women who used the avenue of prayer given to them by God in order to gain relief from the psychological and physical hurt in their lives. Jesus promised us that not only was the avenue of prayer open to God for our hurts and sorrows, He promised two other things to comfort us in our pain. One, that in prayer He would personally take the burden of our hurts upon Himself. Doesn't He say, "Come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest"? Doesn't He say that? Isn't that a promise? Isn't that an invitation? And many times an invitation that people don't take advantage of. And then in prayer, no less than the Holy Spirit would assist us in coming to the Lord. In Romans 8, Paul writes, in the same way the Spirit also helps our weakness. You could substitute the word weakness there for pain. Also helps our pain, also helps our hurt. For we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And He who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because He intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And most of the time, the saints are crying out to God. Why? Because of pain, because of hurt, because of loss. That's why. God provides an avenue of prayer for hurting people, where the entire Godhead, the Father who hears, the Son who shares the burden, and the Holy Spirit who interprets, are all involved with our hurt. Take it to the Lord in prayer is not just a song. It becomes the first line of ministry by God for souls who are hurting. I'll tell you this, if you're hurting but you're not praying, you're suffering more than you need to and not taking advantage of the basic medicine that God offers for times such as these. The Lord of hurting also provides an avenue of teaching. You see, pain does not teach you anything all by itself. All by itself, pain is debilitating and discouraging. But sometimes pain focuses us to search, to question, to think, And for those times, God provides His Word, which is able to teach us tremendous lessons once our hurting brings us there. God's Word is filled with stories of real people who hurt exactly as we do. Their lives give us hope and instruction and empathy for our lives and our hurt and our healing. Through His Word, God provides us with a mirror of our lives. When we look into the mirror, we not only see ourselves and the lives of those contained there, but we also can know the experience of the people we read about in the Scripture. How many times did I read and how many times did I preach about Paul, the apostle who had a thorn in the flesh that made him unable to minister at the level that he wanted to, that somehow reduced him as a man. I preached that so many times and I read it so many times, but I only understood it when I myself became sick 2 years ago. When I myself had to stop working because of the illness that I had, because I saw in myself that I was becoming less and less of the person and the minister that I was once upon a time. I saw it in him, and he showed me the same thing in myself. When my hurt drives me to the Word, I am lifted by the faith of Abraham. I am moved by the loyalty of Ruth. I am humbled by the wisdom of Solomon. I am comforted by the perseverance of Job. I am assured of my own forgiveness when I see David receive pardon for his wickedness. And I pause there. How many times have I looked at David and the things that he did and found encouragement with the thought, if God could forgive that guy what he did, surely He can forgive me for what I did. I am steadied by the promises of Jesus, and I am moved to action by Paul's life and his work, despite his thorn in the flesh. God does not leave us to suffer in darkness. The Lord of hurting shines the light of encouragement and hope on our pain through the lives of fellow believers contained in the Word. And then finally, the Lord of hurting provides an avenue of help. In 1 Corinthians 10:13, Paul writes, "No temptation has overtaken you but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it." So Paul says the following. He talks about a temptation. That Greek word has two meanings that apply in this passage. A temptation meaning a seduction to do evil. There's that meaning of temptation. In the cases where we are tempted to sin, the window of escape may be the Word of God to guide us into what is right and to what is wrong. 2 Timothy 3:16. Or perhaps the window of escape is the Holy Spirit who moves us to do what is right. Romans 8:13. Or perhaps the window of escape is the church itself to teach us and guide us and discipline us. 1 Timothy 3:15. And perhaps the window of escape is the example of those who came before us and what happened to them who obeyed and disobeyed. and their experience guides our experience. Another term for temptation, or another meaning for temptation, is a trial or a test. In situations where we suffer because of a trial or a test, God also provides concrete help to get us through. The window of escape in these hurting situations may be a brother or a sister to lean on, or perhaps something we can do, or resources that we need, or an insight to guide us through our period of hurting. Whatever it is sent to help us endure our hurt, cope with our pain, keep us from losing faith and hope, because that's the problem of pain. The problem of pain is that it saps us slowly of our faith and our hope, because we're using all of our energy to deal with our pain. God always provides the right person and the right thing and the right situation that we need. For example, who else could comfort Jesus in the desert for 40 days and nights but angels? And angels are who God sent to comfort him. And the island in the storm for Paul when he was shipwrecked was exactly what he needed. And the vision of John while he was in exile in Patmos, probably thinking, all is lost, my ministry is finished, I'm separated from the people, I'm on this prison island here. And God gives him a vision, and from that vision comes what we know as the book of Revelation. Our hurt is never so personal, it's never so great that the Lord of hurting cannot provide exactly what we need in order to help us escape despair. A shining example of all of this happened on April 19, 1995. When Oklahoma suffered the Murrah building bombing and the terrible loss of life and the suffering and the hurt it caused for so many people. Many at that time threw themselves on God's mercy and prayer and found the only one who truly could console them for their terrible loss and pain was the Lord himself. And so many newspapers and magazines as well as books were full of reports detailing the wonderful things that people learned because of this tragedy. And of course, the world gave credit to the wonderful spirit of Oklahomans for the love and the help that poured out to the victims at that time. But we know whose spirit that was acting through those people. We know that God opened wide a window of love so that the hurting people of Oklahoma would not sink under the burden of pain and sorrow. Of all the many blessings to come from that dark day, I would say that one of the greatest was that we were able to witness so clearly, so beautifully, the Lord of hurting ministering to the people of our state. And so I ask as I close out this morning, what about you? What is I think that for most people, hopefully, Christmas is supposed to be a joyful time of year. The decoration, everything is joyful. Look at this here. Everything is happy and joyful and bright. The music is joyful. The family activities full of warmth and good cheer. Hopefully, that's what we're shooting for. Even the overall attitude of society recognizes the higher good that this season brings out in everyone. Companies that have no religious affiliations, nevertheless at Christmas time try to accentuate their benevolent activities. Everyone is kinder, hopefully, during this time of year. But there is a paradox, an irony of sorts that exists amid all of this happy mood, and that is that this holiday time of year is also the peak season for suicide and depression. And I don't think I'm telling you something that you don't already know. I think all of us are aware of that. This strange phenomenon repeats itself every year. As the general mood goes up, the number of suicides and doctor visits for depression also goes up. Some say that it's because extremes at one end of the social mood scale initiate extremes at the other end of the social mood scale. So this evening I'd like to examine this problem of grief and depression at Christmas time and how to deal with it if this is your experience or the experience of someone you love, because certainly all of us, everybody here, has lost someone, has lost something, has been disappointed. You know, it's a long list. It may not have happened on December the 25th. My point is, but it feels, you feel it on December 25th. My dad died 55 years ago in the springtime. But I miss him most of all on December 25th. And just a little aside here, you know how Marty and I, we tend to kind of compliment each other in our preaching and that. And so his article in the bulletin this morning is about his dad, and that his dad is not there at this time of year. And I handed in my article already for next Sunday, long before I saw this article this morning, and my article is about my dad and the fact that he's not here. So I think no matter where you are, where you're at, you've got some reasons to think about something that you've lost at this time of year. Now, both research and personal experience tell us that people who have suffered significant loss, the death of a loved one or loss of health or work, often find the holidays, Christmas, not just Christmas, Thanksgiving too, they find this the hardest time to get through. It seems that as the mood of the people around them goes up in anticipation of the vacation, the celebration, the activities, their mood proportionately goes down. Now there are specific reasons for this. We think of holidays as times of being together, and for those who have lost someone, these times tend to highlight the fact that the person that we love isn't there. A spouse that has gone through death or divorce perhaps. A family that is far away, children either dead or perhaps moved out of the house. Holidays tend to remind us of our aloneness. Another reason for personal difficulties is that high emotional times like Christmas tend to stir unhappy emotions along with good ones. You got all these emotions inside of you. It's like a stew, you got all kinds of veggies and meat and stuff. Well, you got all these emotions inside of you, and then all of a sudden, Christmas time, Thanksgiving, a good happy time, where everything gets stirred up. The good and the bad get stirred up. Some people who are able to control their emotions at other times find it hard for them not to overflow with all of the emotional pressure applied during the holidays. And during the holidays, every movie is sentimental, every song is sentimental, every card is sentimental. You can't help feeling sad when everything is there to stimulate your emotions. The bittersweet, nostalgic feelings we have at Christmas naturally tend to go to Christmases past, where we enjoyed other good things. For the person who has an unhappy childhood, or who has lost someone or something that existed in the past, this backward focus tends to be a painful reminder of what they had and lost, or what they never had. Sometimes it's harder to deal with something we never had than to deal with something that we had and lost. And then of course holidays, they run in predictable cycles. You know, Christmas is always December the 25th. And so people with pain and loss also have to anticipate, you know, the first Christmas without grandma, or another Christmas by myself. With time, the scars heal, yes, but the cycle of holidays also become a cycle of times when pain will be more intense than at other times. Yeah, I miss you in February, and yeah, I miss you in July when the sun is hot, and I miss you when school starts, but I really miss you at Christmas. Now, we've been taught that grieving is normal, even healthy, but this does not remove the fact that grieving is painful. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's easy. Just because you have to go through it doesn't mean there's no pain. And some people, faced with the inevitable round of pain that holidays like Christmas will provoke in themselves, they just buckle under and they give way to depression, or even worse, they begin to think that maybe suicide is a viable option in eliminating the pain. How many people have said that? It just hurts too much. I just want the pain to stop. And they think that maybe if they take their own lives, well, maybe that'll take away the pain. And we know that that's certainly not the answer. And of course, grieving's nothing new. It is a universal experience. Some say that the pain caused by grief is felt exactly the same way by every person, regardless of their culture, their language, their religion, their age. Everybody feels the death of a spouse in exactly the same way. Even the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt grieved like you and like me when the angel of death took his firstborn. He wept. He grieved in the same way that you or I would grieve if our firstborn was taken from us. And although Jesus wasn't exactly born in December, there was grief associated with his birth even then. Herod had every male child under 2 years of age killed in order to eliminate Jesus when he was born. The Bible tells the story of the wailing and the mourning and the grieving of the mothers at the loss of their children. And you know, we kind of read that passage, we read that line and we just fly over it because we want to get to, you know, the story about Jesus. There's just a line about Herod. You know, think about that. Somebody knocks on your door and yes, you know, and the police are there, or you know, the military is there or whatever, and they say, you have a little boy, little Johnny here, and how old is he? Well, he's 18 months. Okay, he's coming with us. And you never see him again. These were real people here who lost real children. So if we review the lives of various Bible characters, for example, we'll see that dealing with grief is as old as man himself, and the way that people dealt with their grief is in perfect accord with the grieving process described in modern psychology. I mean, modern psychology explains the process of grieving, but it didn't invent it. For example, Eve, let's go right back to the beginning. Eve, she grieved for her murdered son. She was in silent shock and only breaks her silence when God finally gives her another child who would grow to be righteous. And she acknowledges that God gave her Seth to replace Abel, Genesis 4:25, reminding us that this was on her mind and this was on her heart. Job displayed, you know, pretty good control despite his terrible losses, but eventually his anger at God began to kind of seep out, right? His accusation was similar to many who have been hurt by severe tragedy. He accused God of not being fair. It's not fair. Why me? Why this? Why now? And David the king suffered great anguish at the deceit of Absalom, his beautiful boy, his son, his favorite. He was in major denial, David was. Even though Absalom deceived his father, tried to take the kingdom away from him, even tried to have him killed, David was still trying to save and protect this son of his, and he never even acknowledged his treachery. Talk about denial. And Jeremiah, he saw and warned about the impending destruction of Jerusalem, but no one listened to him. His book of Lamentations is a long and bitter account of his grief and tears over this event. He spent much of his time in depression. Paul the Apostle tried to bargain with God and continually asking Him to remove this thorn or this problem that afflicted him. And of course, Jesus Himself. Even the Lord prayed to have His suffering removed from Him, but to no avail. We witness Him finally accepting God's will for Him in going to the cross, but not before intense prayer and emotion that caused drops of blood to drip from His forehead. All of these people experienced the universal pain of grief and loss like everyone else, and they responded in the same cycle of shock and denial and anger and depression and bargaining and, for some, acceptance that people today go through when they grieve. So I think we have an idea of what grief is, just technically and in our own experience. I've tried to show you that several people in the Bible also experience grieving for their loss in much the same way that we do when we have loss. But where's God in all of this? And that's the point I want to make tonight. Our suffering never goes unnoticed by God. Whether we are in Israel 3,000 years ago or we live in modern America during Christmas time, God cares about our pain and sorrow, and He provides help to deal with these things, whether we are suffering at the point of impact when the loss occurs, or at the reminder stations like Christmas and Thanksgiving and other holidays. Here are some of the ways that God helps us with our grieving at Christmas time or at any time of the year. First of all, He provides His, I was going to say love, but I should say He provides His constant love. The loss of a loved one is really the loss of love that was exchanged between that person and ourselves. Yes, we miss the person, but what's the thing that we miss the most? We miss the love that was going back and forth. That's what we miss. We can never again regain that love. The joy that we lose when someone we once loved leaves us, or when something we love to possess or use is lost to us. The only answer to this is to accept the fact that that love is no longer there. That doesn't solve the problem, that just acknowledges what the problem is. We can, however, focus our need for love on the love of God for ourselves that never leaves us and will always be the same. I go back to Jeremiah in Lamentations chapter 3, verses 32 and 33. Listen to what he says in the midst of his suffering. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love, for he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to the children of men. God does not send the grief. He doesn't send the sorrow, but He does allow us to suffer it when it comes. But He does send and continues to demonstrate His love for us throughout the sorrow. Paul in Romans 8, 35 to 39 describes all of the things that have no power to separate us from God's love. Trouble, he says, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, war, death, life, angels, demons, the present, the future, the powers that be, he says. Nothing in all of creation can separate us from God's love in Jesus Christ. Notice he said, not even death. He's not just talking about our death, He's talking about the death of those that we love. Even the loss of the ones that we love cannot take away or destroy the love that God has for us. These things, they bring grief and they take away our loved ones, but none of these things can extinguish God's love for us. You know, when the grieving is intense, we need to make that special effort to recognize God's continuing love for us in providing help and life and food and all the resources for our support. These are all signs of His uninterrupted love, and we need to stay focused on these. You know, obviously, none of us knew, Carlene, our dear sister who passed away suddenly. It just took everyone by surprise. She hadn't been, quote, sick or hospitalized. And certainly this sermon was ready to go before this news. But look at all the things that are taking place, all the people that come into action to help the family deal with this profound loss. The small things, we're talking about the food that will be there. These people who are grieving and who are going through a difficult time will be served a hot meal by friendly and loving people, many of whom they don't even know. They might not recognize it at the time, but that's God continuing to love them and demonstrating His love to them while they're going through this difficult moment. The cards, the flowers, the messages by the ministers, the visits that they will receive. What are all these things? They're a demonstration of God's love for us when we are suffering. And so we need to stay focused on these things. Yes, I have lost the love of one that I love, but I haven't lost God's love. And sometimes there is comfort in reviewing in our minds and in our hearts the manifold ways that God continues to love us as we go through difficult moments. Another thing that God does that I'd like to mention is that He comforts us, but He comforts us directly. See, before I said He comforts us or He loves us in a lot of ways, people and the things that people do, the agents, His agents. But sometimes God comforts us directly. Grief is like a heavy coat that just comes over us. You talk about people going through grief and they say, well, it's like a heaviness, right? It's like a heavy stone that weighs on your heart. When you're grieving, it's as if somebody's pressing down on your heart. It hurts physically. It's like a huge wave that just overwhelms us in sorrow and depression. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. My question is, comforted by who? Well, comforted by God. Let's read it again. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted by God. David said, but you, O God, do see trouble and grief. You consider it to take it in hand. The victim commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Psalm 10, verse 14. In these passages, God is the direct helper and comforter of the sad and the oppressed. We like to pray, God, please work through your ministers or work through your servants to comfort and heal, or direct the hands of the doctors and help the ministers say the right thing, and work through your people, Lord. But God, it's true, works through people many times, but sometimes He works directly to help, to comfort, to support, and to heal. No middleman. No middleman. Just you and God. Jesus promised the apostles that He would send the Comforter, not only to help their memory, but also to help them in difficult times. To give them, for example, the right words to say when persecuted, Luke chapter 12, verse 12. And to comfort the church in times of difficulty and change, Acts chapter 9, verse 31. Of course, He gives this comfort to the Christian who trusts in God's ability and willingness to deal directly with his hurts and sorrows. I believe in God's direct ability to lift my sorrow. When all of a sudden, from one moment to the next, what seemed impossible, what seemed so difficult, what seemed so hurtful, what seemed that, oh Lord, am I going to have to live with this or deal with this impossible thing the rest of my life, that it seems so hopeless, and then somehow in the middle of my prayer, that thing is just lifted from me. The situation hasn't changed, the obstacle is still there, the thing that is causing my pain and my fear is still there, but somehow I sense in my spirit, I think I'll be okay. It's going to hurt, but I think I'm going to make it. I'll be okay. Who do you think did that? Satan? He's the only other spirit out there interested in working on me. Well, no. Why is it that we find it so hard to believe that God will directly work within us when we continually pray to Him? Why should we be surprised that He answers the prayer? I'm not. There are times when our deepest depression is suddenly lifted and we experience that peace that surpasses understanding. That peace that surpasses understanding is not always intellectual enlightenment. We like to think, that it's always, if I can understand it, if I can explain it, if I can go 1A and B and C and D and therefore, summarize and there's the... We think we have to have that experience in order to have the peace that surpasses understanding, meaning the peace that surpasses understanding happens when we understand. But he's saying the exact opposite. It surpasses understanding. I don't know how I got there spiritually. I can't explain it to you. I can't give you an equation. I just know what happened. I understand. Before I felt lost, before I felt it was impossible, and now I have hope. Can God do that? Absolutely He can do that. Do we ever ask Him to? That's another question. This happens not only because of pills and medication and meditation or exercise and counseling. Sometimes it just happens suddenly as God reaches into our lives and personally comforts us with His presence. We don't know how or why, we just know that the grief is gone for a moment, for a day. And so how does God help us? His uninterrupted love, if we're willing to see it, and His direct comfort, if we're willing to accept it. And then God also, for those who are grieving, He also supplies hope. The sting of grief is the finality of the event. Death, loss of health, the loss of our partner, the loss of whatever, our job, our mobility, it's gone, no getting it back. And it hurts because whatever is lost is not coming back. I remember as a 15-year-old, not long after my own father died, he died right in front of me, had a heart attack. And you know how it is when you're that age, or if you've lost somebody, there's a lot of activity going on, the funeral, the relatives coming in and out. You don't have time to think, right? And I remember when everything finished, my mom had to go back to work. I mean, I was 15. So she went back to work, and then, and I would come home from school and I'd have my key and I'd let myself in. And back in those days, they would show reruns of shows, and one of the reruns they showed was of I Love Lucy. Remember I Love Lucy? I think we got the crowd here that knows I Love Lucy. And I still remember the show. It's the I Love Lucy edition where she's working on an assembly line making cakes or something, and she's do-do-do-do, and she's doing okay, and the cakes, and she's fixing it, and they're going by, and then all of a sudden, right, she misses one, and the thing starts going faster and faster, and then they've got the canned laughter, everybody's laughing, and I'm watching this. And the thought that strikes me is, my father is dead, and Lucy is still clowning around. She doesn't know my father is dead. Life is just going to go on without him, won't it? His death didn't change anything in I Love Lucy or the hockey game on Saturday night. The only thing it changed was my life. And that's when I understood that he was not coming back. And I would have to go on without him. And 55 years later, I'm still having trouble with that memory. But God supplies hope. God ministers to this pain by providing hope for the future despite the pain of the moment. When we feel that there's no use going on, or there is nothing good in the future, or there is no future, or the future is not going to be like we always thought it was going to be, or the future is not going to be like we want it to be, or the future is not going to be like it ought to be for ourselves, for our children. When that happens, God gives us hope. He gives us a vision for the future. Isaiah said in reference to the fall of Israel and her destruction, "Your sun will never set again, and your noon will wane no more. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end." Isaiah 60:20. In reference to the loss of their leader and Lord, Jesus said to the apostles, "Because I have said these things, you are filled with grief. I will tell you the truth. You will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy." John 16:6 and 20. In these passages, God makes two promises in providing hope to those who have lost in life and have a bleak view of the future. Promise number one, whatever you've lost, He will replace it with better. The home prepared in heaven will be worth whatever grief we have suffered here. And promise number two, wherever you go, He will be there with you. Whether you grieve in loneliness or illness or loss of position or death, God promises to remain with you and create a future for you with Himself. You may not have a future with your father or your child or your spouse or someone else. Maybe you won't have a future with them, but He promises that you will have a future with Him. So let us not be like the pagans who grieve and who have no hope. As Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13, let us believe in God and let us remain faithful to Christ, who gives us a hope in a better and an eternal future with Him. And so since this paradox of joy and sadness does exist at this time of year, let's remember a few important ideas that will help us at this time. Important and practical. Idea number one, let's be sensitive to those around us who may be covering a broken heart. Christmas is a time for family and rejoicing, absolutely, but it can also be a time when we can minister to those who struggle during this period. Just keep your eyes open. Just keep your ears open. Number two, if you are struggling, Try to stay focused on what God has done in ministering to you at this time. Recognize and acknowledge His love for you, and go ahead and ask for His direct comfort, His direct intervention. And remember that no matter what, you do have a glorious future through Jesus Christ, no matter how bleak things may seem here and now. And finally, don't resent those who are happy just because you are not. Don't be envious. Realize that sooner or later we all get our turn to cry. Everybody gets there sooner or later. Don't resent them. Pray for them. It'll be healthier for you and healthier for them. Of course, the most sorrowful thing